Good evening, everyone. Stepping into the unknown. Well, we've heard tonight, ever since we were born, we've been all stepping into the unknown. And we've also heard, when we die, we are also all going to be stepping into the unknown. I think stepping into the unknown is the untold story inside us all. I make extreme films. As Michelle said, I made a film up in the high Arctic on the most northern coastline of land in Canada. And I made a film on Mount Everest. And my most recent, I've written books about that. And my most recent film, 500 Days in the Wild, is about my 6-year journey on the longest trail in the world. We want to talk about stepping into the unknown. So the TransCanada Trail is now 29,000 kilometers long and is stitched 600 land and water trails that have been stitched together. It connects the Atlantic, the Arctic, and the Pacific Ocean. And my plan, sitting at my kitchen table before I left, was to hike, bike, snowshoe, and backcountry ski these 16,000 kilometers of land trails and paddle a canoe 8,000 kilometers approximately of the water trails. Let's unpack how that really went down. So I left, and in the first 4 months, I lost 5 tents. A few tents I got destroyed in a storm when the poles broke. One tent, the windows just fell out of due to some glue manufacturing defect. But probably the most humbling of them all was the tent that I just lost because I wasn't mindful enough when I attached it to my bike the morning I left. I was covered in bruises. My shoes, the soles of my shoes fell off my shoes, I think, in the first week. I was swept out into open water on my first paddle. I was failing camping school miserably when I left. And to make matters worse, on day 10, I realized, wow, you have not gone in 10 days what you thought you could do in 3. So that schedule that I made was not kind of working out according to plan. And I had my first crisis of faith out there on the TransCanada Trail. I'm like, what in the bleep are you doing out here right now, You can't do this. This is crazy. But my mom always taught me that when things feel overwhelming, if you can, sleep on it and take a look at it again in the morning. So I took my mother's advice and I slept on it, and sure enough, by morning I had a plan. Burn the schedule. And I'm going to say that is my first lesson from stepping into the unknown. Be prepared to adapt the plan. So, at that point, I was really kind of surrendering to the journey. And I realized that maybe the second lesson I was also going to learn here was, it's not about the fastest way. It's not about the easiest way. As a storyteller on this journey, it's about the most meaningful way. And so I realized, I came out here to make a film. I came out here to check out, to check in. And what I mean by that is I'd read this quote by a man named Reinhold Messner, who was the first man to summit Everest without oxygen. And when he was asked, why do you climb these mountains? He said, I climb high to go deep inside. And so checking out to check in was, for me, that same thing. It was taking the time out to check in on my own life. So this second lesson, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was actually a very crucial lesson on my journey because it changed the narrative. It changed the whole narrative of to just surrendering to the journey. Well, days became weeks, and weeks became months, and months became years. And, the good news is I didn't lose a tent after the first 5 months. That was redeeming. And I got in a lot better shape. And that leads me to my next lesson, which is we aren't what we say we want, we are what we're willing to suffer for. And this lesson I had learned much earlier in my life, but it actually was the lesson that opened up the opportunities for these films to happen. When I was a young girl in high school, and even into my early 20s, I never knew I was going to be a documentary filmmaker, although I will say that it is a synthesis of all my passions. I love filming, I love writing, I love nature, and I love the outdoors. But when I was growing up, I was a very serious student. By grade 9, I stopped taking art because it was an elective, which is sad, really, because art was my favorite class. And I started taking Latin instead of home ec, which in hindsight, you kind of have to eat 3 times a day, and I'm not really using that much Latin. But I knew as a young teenager that I didn't want to be a beautiful woman. I didn't want to be a sexy woman, and I didn't even want to be a kind woman. I wanted to be a smart woman. So that's why I was making those decisions. And everything was going to plan until I was 23. And then I fell in love with a woman. And this was not part of the plan. This was a boomerang into my rational mind. So I gotta tell you, it didn't go well. It was the 1980s. I ended up losing my job, losing my home, got a mountain bike and a tent instead, Financially, very bad decision in my life and I always laugh when people talk about coming out, because it's like, no, man, it took me years to find my self-love and my self-respect after that happened. But here's the funny thing. I was happier. Even though my life had gotten harder, I felt free. I felt happy. I felt excited. I felt I was living an authentic life. And now I wanted that authenticity in my professional career. So that's what brought me into the filmmaking world. As I said, everything that I'm doing is a synthesis of my passions. The fears that we have are the fears that we leave with when we step into the unknown. For sure, when I left, I was afraid of just sleeping alone in my tent at night, a woman alone in the woods. But night after night went by, and nothing bad happened. And a fear needs to be fed in order to keep growing. Fear is like that plant in your garden. It needs to be watered if you want it to grow. If you stop watering, it will die. So the fear wasn't getting fed. Nothing was happening. So that fear started to go away. The next fear was just that fear of, I have to accept responsibility for myself. I'm going to be alone, and if anything goes wrong, nobody else can come and rescue me. And in fact, I would say the second most common question I get asked is, weren't you alone out there? Didn't you get lonely? And the funny thing was, I never did. Because humans are just 0.01% of all life on Earth. And when you spend time in nature, you are connecting to the other 99.9%. You are connecting to the web of life. And I'm going to play a little video for you, just a short one, a little moment from my second year out there. I'm paddling Lake Superior, and I'm having one of these moments. Journey. They say you're supposed to let nature take its course, but I'm going to try to save the butterfly. Just hang on, don't freak out. For the journey, need a heart of gold. There you go, buddy. For the journey, need nerves of steel. And kind of be the ship's captain. I carry you with me, let the future unfold. 2 little fragile spirits. Dream written on the map of my soul. Just don't be scared, it's okay. We're in this together. Oh, great spirit is above.
so low.
She's going. Yay, butterfly.
In a long stretch of blue.
When I left on 500 Days in the Wild, I had no money. The bike I brought was 40 years old, and it was the younger one in our relationship. My backpack was 15 years old. I borrowed. I got things from thrift stores. Before I left, I never asked myself, what are the obstacles between me and achieving what I wanted to do? I only thought of, until day 10 when I had my crisis of faith, I only ever asked myself, how can I make this happen with what I have right now? And also before I left, I also knew that I wanted to pay respects to the ancestors while I traveled. And I went up to Haida Gwaii 3 months before I left, and I met a traditional knowledge expert named Vern Williams and his partner at that time, Dianne Chamberlain. And I told them about the journey I was going to make across this land. We all cried about the murdered and missing woman. And Vern gifted me his feather that he used in ceremony. This is a stranger to me, gifting me the most important thing in his life for my journey. So when I accepted the feather, I had an immediate amount of respect and reverence for this feather because of how it was given to me. He was giving me the thing that he valued the most in life to a total stranger. And I didn't know how. I was also terrified that this very fragile feather was something I would have to care for on my journey. Well, about a year after I left, Vern Williams had a granddaughter, and her name is Lillian Hope. And I knew the day that Lillian was born, that if Feather and I made it back to the end of that trail, I would bring the feather back up to Haida Gwaii and gift it to her. And 6 years later, that's what happened. And I guess on this note, I will tell you that this is the most valuable lesson that I learned from stepping into the unknown. What you carry in your heart will shape your journey. Peace and love, everyone. Thank you.